All right, so in this video, we're going to go over all the transformations. We're going to be putting everything together here, okay? So we're going to have functions. We're going to go through a set order for us for how to perform these transformations, and then we'll end up with a graph, okay? When I do the graphs, I'm going to use desmos.com to kind of walk you through the transformations instead of doing it manually here. I think that'll be helpful for you, okay? First thing, remember, there's a lot of different orders that are going to work here, okay? There are multiple orders that you can perform each transformation, okay? But you got to be careful. Not each transformation can be given in any certain order. You know, you don't want to do some transformations before the others. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a set plan for how to go through these transformations, okay? So first thing, reminder to determine what the parent function is before you do anything else, okay? So in our example, our first example here, we've got a quadratic. Okay, it's important to note that your parent function is y equals x squared. Okay, and in our second example, we've got a square root function. So you've got to remember that your parent function is y equals radical x. Okay, so you always want to understand what your parent function is before you do anything else. Okay, so the order that I've set for us to use, we're going to do horizontal shifts first. We're going to do any stretches or compressions, horizontal or vertical, next. Then we're going to do a reflection about the y-axis if it's present. Then we'll do a reflection about the x-axis if that's present. And we're going to end up with vertical shifts, okay? So with this order in mind, let's look at this function, okay? So f of x equals 1 minus 2 times the quantity x minus 3 to the second power. So again, our parent function is y equals x squared, or f of x equals x squared, okay? Our first transformation is going to be a horizontal shift. Okay, so we look inside parentheses here, and we know we're going to shift to the right 3 units. Remember, it's kind of counterintuitive. It's the opposite of this negative 3 here. We're going right 3 units. Okay. Next thing we want to do is any stretches or compressions. Now, there's no coefficient of x here, so there's no horizontal stretch or compression. There is a coefficient out here. This 2 is going to be a vertical stretch by a factor of 2. Okay. Next thing, reflection about the y-axis. Well, there's no negative coefficient of x, so there is no reflection about the y-axis. So let's move on down to 4. This 2, that's a coefficient of the squared expression, is negative. Okay, so there is going to be a reflection about the x-axis. Okay, and then we've got our 1 out here. That's going to be a vertical shift. This 1 is positive, so our graph is going to shift vertically up 1 unit. Okay. All right, so let's scroll this way, and I'm going to use Desmos over here, okay? And I'm going to try to make sure we can see as much as possible. All right, so again, let's start with I'm going to use parentheses. Okay, so let's start with our parent function, which is x squared. Okay, and we're going to go through our transformations in order. So our first was a horizontal shift to the right 3 units. So I changed the function to x minus 3 squared. Okay. The next thing was a vertical shift, a vertical stretch by a factor of 2. So that's adding the coefficient here of 2. So you can see that graph was stretched upward. Okay. Next thing I want to do is the reflection. So I'm going to change that sign to a negative. Okay. So you're going to see that was reflected about the x-axis. Okay. And then the last thing is to put the vertical shift in. I'm going to add the 1 out front, and you'll see the graph move up 1 unit. Okay? All right, so we went through those transitions in order, those transformations in order. Right 3, stretch by a factor of 2, reflect about the x-axis, and then a vertical shift up 1 unit. Okay? All right. Now, let's go ahead and look at the second problem here. Remember, we want to determine the parent function first. We had a radical or a square root function down here in part B, okay? So first transformation is the horizontal shift. This is a plus 2, so we're going to shift to the left 2 units, okay? There is no coefficient of x here. It's you know, the absolute value of that coefficient is 1, so we're not going to deal with that just yet. We'll deal with the negative and a reflection a little bit later on. So we're going to go out to the front here. This coefficient of 3 creates a vertical stretch by a factor of 3. Okay. Now, this negative value in here is a y-axis reflection. Okay. And we don't have a x-axis reflection here because this 3 was not negative. Okay, notice there's a positive coefficient of the square root term, so there is no reflection about the x-axis. And then we've got our vertical shift up 4 units. Okay, so horizontal shift left 2, vertical stretch by a factor of 3, 1 reflection about the y-axis, and then a vertical shift up 4 units. Okay, all right, so let's change this to the square root of x. So square root of x. So that's my basic function you can see here. Okay. We're going to do our horizontal shift first. Okay, so we shifted 2 units to the left. And we're going to put our vertical stretch factor out front of 3. So you notice, see how we stretch that graph vertically. Let me bring this down a little bit. Okay. Our reflection, again, we're going to change this x to a negative x, so you'll see that reflection about the y-axis this time. So see how that reflected. Let me move it over here. All right, and then the last thing is the vertical shift, so we're going to put a +4 here, and you see how that graph shifted up. Okay, so the graph of this function looks like this. We went through 4 transformations, a shift to the left 2 units, a vertical stretch by a factor of 3, a reflection about the y-axis, and then a vertical shift up 4 units, okay? So that's kind of putting everything together. There's a lot more examples you could go through, but with this video I wanted to cover a couple basic examples that had different types of transformations.